What image rises from our head at the word pirates? How do we see them? Like brave sailors with black eye patch, a parrot on a shoulder and with a saber at the ready, or like tricky sea wolves hiding their treasures until better times. Pirates' life excited people's minds at all times. Who among us hasn't read the novel Treasure Island by Stevenson or hasn't watched the Pirates of the Caribbean? But how did pirates live in the reality? Piracy has existed for thousands of years. It originated in those times when people were able to go into the open sea. There was an incident in history when Julius Caesar himself was captured by pirates. During being captured, he promised to crucify his captors, what he actually did by executing them after his release. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, pirates were a real threat to merchant shipping, from the Baltic to the Mediterranean Sea, and barbarian pirates ravaged until the 19th century. As Europeans developed more new territory, they faced new types of piracy, near Africa, in Indian and Pacific Oceans. A new stage of development for piracy was the discovery of America. So, in the 16th century, the trade routes linking the Old World to the New one began to develop rapidly. Trade ships carried sugar, tobacco, coffee, logwood, precious metals, and slaves. The Atlantic Ocean, that caravans of ships laden with untold treasures were going through, turned into real hunting areas for gentlemen of fortune. After the discovery of America, the world was divided by two of the most powerful countries of those times, Portugal and Spain. In 1530, the Portuguese started colonizing the territory of Brazil very sweepingly. But for the Spanish, everything was pretty clear. They considered all the territory of North and South America, beside Brazil, as their possessions. So the term Spanish Main appeared. In the 16th century, it indicated any area in the Caribbean as a Spanish territory. Untold treasures flowed into Spain from its new colonies. In just a quarter of a century, from 1535 to 1560, the Spanish took away more gold and silver than it was mined in the mines in Europe for all their existence. Such state of things couldn't help but outrage other European sea powers like England, France, and Holland. They were also attracted by treasures of Spanish Main. That gave an impulse to the development of privateering. And here we need to clear up some things. If you ask modern people who pirates are, many will respond, pirates are those who are engaged in sea robberies. And of course they will be right, but for people of those times everything was a little bit different. The point is there were several types of pirates. Let's find out who is who. So privateers were the first type of pirates. They were basically legal pirates. They were individuals commissioned by the authorities to engage in piracy. They had a letter of marque letting them carry out legal violence at sea. Of course, privateers could attack only the enemies of the country that issued a letter of marque for them. Otherwise, they became ordinary pirates and were outside the law. They also had to share their loot with the government. When privateers were captured, they were considered as prisoners of war, and that was a big advantage. But when pirates were captured, they were sent to the gallows. Their bodies were put on display to the public as a warning to those who want to become a pirate. The French also called privateers corsairs, but later this term started being associated with the Mediterranean pirates. One of the most famous pirates of that time was Francis Drake. The Queen Elizabeth I granted him a privateering commission in 1570. He was in the service of the English crown and plundered Spanish galleons with the approval of his country. Francis Drake came back to England with a loot that was twice more than the year income of the English treasury. Remarkably, he was not only a pirate but also a traveler who sailed around the world. He was the only one who discovered the passage connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was called the Passage of Drake. For the English he was a privateer and a national hero, but for the Spanish he was an infamous pirate. Buccaneers are the next who we are going to talk about. Buccaneers were pirates plundering the Spanish in the Caribbean in the 17th century. Initially, they were settlers on Hispaniola selling smoked meat to pirates. In return, they got gunpowder, weapons, and shot. In France, buccaneers were called filibusters. Spain was trying to put an end to the illegal trade, but of course it didn't succeed. Moreover, soon buccaneers turned into a formidable foe that Spain had to be reckoned with. Later, Jamaica became the center of attraction for buccaneers. It was captured by the English in 1655 under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell. This island was in the center of the Spanish possessions. From here they could attack Spanish ships sailing nearby and had access to Spanish ports. The English enlisted support of buccaneers to protect the island. There were people of different nationalities among them. The governor of Jamaica, Edward Dolly, started to issue privateering commissions. As a result, the new wave of arrivals was able to reinforce its economy, and Port Royal, a city in Jamaica, turned into a busy buccaneer harbor. To understand what kind of people buccaneers were, let's consider some representatives who devoted themselves to this job. Daniel Manbar gained the fame of one of the most cruel filibusters of the 17th century. Manbar was born around 1645 in Languedoc in France. He burned with hatred for the Spanish after reading stories about the brutality of conquistadors in the New World. The hatred greatly intensified after his uncle's death in the battle with the Spanish. For his excessive cruelty, he was called Manbar the Exterminator. Indeed, he wiped out the Spanish in the New World with enviable persistence. The filibuster was notorious for his sophisticated tortures. He loved cutting open a prisoner's stomach, removing intestines, and nailing them to the mast. A poor man was forced to dance around the mast, covered with a burning piece of wood, until he finally dies. The circumstances of the death of this man weren't known. Perhaps he could perish in the sea during his travels, or could be killed by someone who was even more bloodthirsty than him. Brasiliana came from Holland and moved to Brazil. After the Portuguese reclaimed the city of Recife from the Dutch in 1654, Brasiliana appeared in Port Royal and turned to piracy. In 1666, he was lucky to sight a Spanish galleon traveling from the Mexican port Veracruz. However, he squandered all the loot in taverns of Port Royal. Buccaneers mostly were brutal, but even among them, Brasiliana stood out for his unbalance and passion for sadism. The most known case happened in a tavern where, after some drinks, the buccaneer started running around the streets, injuring anyone on his path. The Dutch was infamous for torturing Spanish prisoners. The atrocities he committed were truly terrifying. He often tried to spit at his victims on wooden stakes, roasted them alive between two fires like killing a pig. The destiny of Roque Brasiliana remains unknown. Perhaps he met his death in Port Royal after coming back there around 1670. Paris' life was short and calculated in some years, and even in some months. They were constantly persecuted and outside the law. However, the appeal of becoming a pirate didn't diminish. Why was piracy so alluring, and what pushed people onto the path of sea robbery, looting, and murderers? To sort out these issues, we need to understand the way people lived. Now we are talking about sailors, who were mostly those who became pirates. In 17th-18th centuries, sailors' working conditions were very severe and full of dangers. Famine, diseases, thirst, low wages, and bestial attitude from ship owners and traders didn't contribute to the popularity of this type of activity. It's not surprising that for simple sailors, serving in the Navy was equal to a prison sentence. People often started engaging in piracy to stand against injustice, but not in the race for a great profit. Pirates knew that simple sailors' working conditions weren't very good because they often had the same backgrounds as them. That's why, as a rule, at the capture of a vessel, they treated sailors indulgently. What can be said about commanders? So, if pirates found out the captain of a captured ship had treated sailors bad and roughed them up, his hand was cut off. Officers were tied to the mainmast, and anyone could throw bottles at them or use whips to beat them with. But if a team was satisfied with the commanders, those were allowed to go. Some pirates even had a special position called a giver of justice. This person listened to sailors' complaints of a seized vessel and decided what punishment officers deserved. The scheme was quite tricky because after commander's public humiliation, a crew had no other choice but joining pirates. Life on board a pirate vessel was arranged in a different way comparing to trading or military vessels. There was much more freedom there. Pirates had the pirate code, a set of rules regulating life on board the ship. The most brilliant thing on pirate's ship was the ability to choose a captain. Pirates could depose the captain due to lack of professionalism, extreme cruelty, or cowardice in the battle. Is it worth telling that sailors on ordinary vessels could only dream about these things, because nobody reckoned with their opinion? Every crew member had the right to vote when resolving topical issues like where to sail or what to do with the captured. Sea robbers had the access to food and strong drinks at any time whenever they wanted. On the pirate's vessel, a ship captain ate the same food as his team. There were no exceptions. If a team wanted to pay respect to its captain, a special dish was cooked for him, but it was served to the captain to the common table. This favorably distinguished pirates from sailors of military and commercial shipping, where social inequality was obvious. While simple sailors were suffering from scurvy, eating crackers and salt pork, for a captain and officers, ration was absolutely different. There wasn't a fixed payment on the pirate ship. The earnings of pirates entirely depended on their loot. Treasures were equally divided between crew members, only captain could get more, or sailors whose skills were highly appreciated, for example navigation skills. The difference in pay between ordinary seamen and officers on trading or military ship was really huge. A captain got a payment dozen times higher than sailors. Under conditions of limited space on the ship, inability to go to the shore for many months, homosexual relations among pirates were quite common. Such kinds of affairs were called marriage. It was very similar to same-gender marriage. Having such unions, sailors supported each other. For example, if one got sick or injured, the other took care of him. Pirates honored such type of relationship, and captains strictly watched to ensure that in case of the death of a partner, the other one got his part of loot. It wasn't welcomed on commercial or military vessels, but on pirate ships there was much more freedom and less restrictions. Pirates were some kind of rebels of their time. They challenged the established order of things and didn't want to obey the rules where some have everything and others have nothing. There is an interesting story here, the story of Sam Bellamy. Love pushed Black Sam on the way of sea robbery. He fell in love with Maria Hallett, a girl from Massachusetts. But her parents were against their marriage because Bellamy was an ordinary sailor. Then he intended to build a fortune and took up plundering trading vessels. One time he was committing robberies in the team with a French pirate, Olivier Levasseur. Together they seized some vessels, but the most successful raid for Bellamy was the capture of the slave ship Whydah, laden with rum, ivory, golden and silver coins. Shortly after that, the ship on which he was sailing to meet his beloved Maria Hallett was caught in a violent storm and sank. Bellamy's hatred to those in power is brightly reflected in the conversation happened between him and the captain of a trading vessel. Here is his quote: "They vilify us, the scoundrels do. When there is only this difference, they rob the poor under the cover of law, forsooth, and we plunder the rich under the protection of our own courage. Had you not better make them one of us than sneak after these villains for employment?" His words fully reflected the views of many pirates in those times. Mistreatment of slaves, excessive taxes for the poor, and the impunity of the rich, religious persecutions were abiding features of that time. Cruelty bred cruelty, and piracy became a kind of response to it, even though calling pirates white and fluffy would be totally inappropriate. The golden age of piracy bred pirates of all stripes. It was a really short period of time in history. It started at the beginning of 18th century and lasted about 25 years. But if we are talking about it, we can't overlook Bartholomew Roberts. He was one of the last representatives of the golden age of piracy. In the early 18th century, the fame of his deeds traveled far ahead of him. In pirate community, he was truly odious personality. For 3 years of his career, he was responsible for plundering over 400 ships and looting gold valued at more than £50 million. What kind of a man was Roberts? He was quite well educated, didn't welcome alcohol, and was against gambling. They said the pirate had a very extravagant behavior. He loved living in a big way. The best clothes, expensive jewelry, delightful music on board the ship. Roberts lived like there was no tomorrow. One day he sighted a ship with a diamond cross on board. The job was meant for a Portuguese king. Of course, Roberts wasn't a king, but he was happy to wear the ornament. But let's start from the very beginning and find out how the man who didn't even think to be a pirate became one of the most notorious sea robbers. Bartholomew Roberts was born in 1682 in Wales. He was rather good-looking, and his nickname, Black Bart, he got because of dark skin tone. In 1719, he served on the slave ship Princess off the coast of West Africa. The vessel was captured by pirates led by Captain Howell Davis. He managed to force Roberts to join his team. So begins Bartholomew Roberts' path as a pirate. Thanks to his sharp mind, navigation skills, and his courage in battle, Black Bart quickly gained respect of his new friends and became a captain. This is what Roberts himself said about it. Since I have already sunk my hands in the murky but fascinating water of piracy, I accept the position because it is always more honorable to be a pirate commander than a simple common man. After leaving African coast, Roberts with his team traveled to Brazil. In the Bay of Bahia, they came across Portuguese trading vessels. Black Bart approached one of Portuguese ships and dropped anchor. Then he invited the captain of that vessel for a friendly chat. The man didn't even suspect he was on a pirate ship, and when he realized that, it had already been late. Roberts explained the real state of things. If the guest doesn't point to the richest vessel in the flotilla, he will suffer a painful death. It turned out the most precious things were on the vessel called Sagrada Familia. Roberts made for it, and after a cruel fight, pirates seized it. There were 240,000 pesos and the very diamond cross on board. Then pirates headed to Devil's Island to share their loot and celebrate their success. But something went wrong. Roberts was aware of a trading ship going not so far. He gave chase to it, but couldn't catch up with the ship. After coming back, he found out the ships and treasures on them had disappeared. They had been taken by Walter Kennedy. He was one of Roberts' crew members. The captain stayed with the sloop and some loyal people. Later he traveled to Barbados, where he came into fight with two military ships by accident. Those offered a desperate resistance. As a result, Roberts lost 35 people and his sloop was seriously damaged. For him it was intolerable humiliation. He swore to take revenge on Barbadians. Escaping from death, he was able to get to the coast of Dominica to carry the ship. After the fiasco in the Caribbean, pirates set off for Newfoundland. Bart didn't even suspect this decision saved his life, because in some time after their leaving, two military ships were sent by the governor of Martinique to crack down on pirates. When Roberts knew about it, he was in a fury. Actually, he had special hatred for the governors of Martinique and Barbados. All their attempts to catch him he took as a personal insult. Black Bart even designed a new flag featuring the image of Sword and him standing on two skulls. One was marked ABH, a Barbadian's head, the other AMH, a Martinican's head. Black Bart was going to rob fishing and whaling fleets in Newfoundland, and he succeeded. At that time, Roberts' reputation was already such that when his 10-gun sloop enters the Piracy Bay to the sound of music, the sailors of 22 vessels just jumped into the water. Nothing prevented Roberts and his people from looting the ships. After choosing for himself the best ship, Black Bart burned the rest of them. In total, during Roberts' sailing in the waters of Newfoundland, over 40 ships and more than 100 of small vessels were plundered or even destroyed. Understanding that soon military ships would be sent into the waters of Newfoundland, Black Bart sailed to West India. In October, Roberts traveled to the island of St. Kitts to the port of Buster. He wanted to enlist the support of authorities, but those gave him a cold shoulder. In revenge, pirates shelled the city and burned all the ships in his way. Then Roberts set off for the French island of Saint Barthélemy. Governor didn't offer any resistance, and pirates were given the right to trade the loot. At Dominica, Roberts captured a large trading Dutch ship and destroyed another 15 vessels anchoring near the island. Then he headed to West Africa. There he made raids on the ship carrying ivory, gold and slaves. But in the 1722, the luck turned away from Roberts. Off the coast of Whydah, he came across 50-gun frigate Swallow led by the Captain Challoner Ogle. With the appearance of Swallow, most of the pirates were drunk. You might ask why pirates were under the influence of alcohol. We all remember that Roberts was against alcohol drinking. This discrepancy can be explained easily. The commander could control his team on board the ship, but on the shore his power greatly weakened. He couldn't forbid pirates to paint the town red. In the beginning, Roberts took a frigate for a trading vessel and sent the Great Ranger to chase it. Pretending that he is trying to get away from the chase, Captain Ogle let pirates pursue him for several hours. And then, when both of the ships were out of the sight of other pirates, he slowed down and fired the broadside. After 2 hours fighting, the Great Ranger was defeated. Soon after that, the Swallow approached Whydah again. This time, Black Bart decided to give battle. His plan was to exchange broadsides and sail into the direction that the Swallow wasn't able to chase him. The plan was risky, but it could work. Roberts gave commands one after another, but his people let him down. They were too slow and disorganized after spending the whole night drinking. This fight was the last for Black Bart. During the battle, he got shot in the neck. They say that then the pirate was wearing his best clothes, a rich crimson damask waistcoat and breeches, a red feather in his hat, a gold chain around his neck with a diamond cross hanging to it. So, in all his glory, Bartholomew Roberts met his death. The commander's death undermined pirates' fighting spirit, and they gave up. Those of his team who were able to survive were sent to the Cape Coast. 77 African pirates were sold to the slave traders, and further 79 were acquitted. They managed to prove they had been forced to join pirates against their will. The rest were sentenced either to the death on the gallows or to the forced labor in the Cape Coast mines. So one of the most notorious pirates of that age ended his life, and with him the golden age of piracy itself. A lot of people romanticize pirates fighting their life fascinating. In many respects it's happening because their life is so different from ours. Sea battles, adrenaline rush, exotic islands and treasures. Who among us doesn't want to break out of the routine at least for a day and get life full of adventures? It sounds alluring. But in fact the reality of pirates' life was quite unpleasant. There was nothing romantic in the golden age of piracy, and certainly nothing gold at all. Basically, people engaged in piracy because they didn't have another opportunity to feed themselves. And what do you think about pirates? Who were they? Notorious villains or people opposing the system of labor? Leave your comments down below, it will be interesting for me to know your opinion.